New Theories of the Origin of Untouchability. Chapter 9. Contempt for Buddhists as the Root of Untouchability. Chapter 10. Beef Eating as the Root of Untouchability. Chapter 9. Contempt for Buddhists as the Root of Untouchability. Section 1. The Census Reports for India, published by the Census Commissioner at the interval of every 10 years from 1870 onwards, contains a wealth of information nowhere else to be found regarding the social and religious life of the people of India. Before the census of 1910, the Census Commissioner had a column called Population by Religion. Under this heading, the population was shown: number 1, Muslims; number 2, Hindus; number 3, Christians, etc. The census report for the year 1910 marked a new departure from the prevailing practice. For the first time, it divided the Hindus under 3 separate categories: 1, Hindus; 2, animists and tribal; and 3, the depressed classes or untouchables. This new classification has been continued ever since. Section 2. This departure from the practice of the previous Census Commissioner raises 3 questions. First is, what led the Commissioner for the census of 1910 to introduce this new classification? The second is, what was the criteria adopted as a basis for this classification? The third is, what are the reasons for the growth of certain practices which justify the division of Hindus into 3 separate categories mentioned above? The answer to the first question will be found in the address presented in 1909 by the Muslim community under leadership of H.H. the Aga Khan to the then Viceroy, Lord Minto, in which they asked for a separate and adequate representation for the Muslim community in the legislature, executive, and the public services. In the address, there occurs the passage, reference taken from, for the text of the address, see My Pakistan, page 431. Quotation begins: The Mohammedans of India number, according to the census taken in the year 1901, over 62 millions, or between 1/5 and 1/4 of the total population of His Majesty's Indian dominions. Reference: a few lines now are highlighted in italics in the book, though not in the original text. And if a reduction be made for the uncivilized portions of the community enumerated under the heads of animist and other minor religions, as well as for those classes who are ordinarily classified as Hindus but properly speaking are not Hindus at all, the proportion of Mohammedans to the Hindu majority becomes much larger. The lines highlighted in italics are over, reference over, and the quotation continues. We therefore desire to submit that under any system of representation, extended or limited, a community in itself more numerous than the entire population of any first-class European power except Russia may justly lay claim to adequate recognition as an important factor in the state. We venture indeed, with Your Excellency's permission, to go a step further and urge that the position accorded to the Mohammedan community in any kind of representation, direct or indirect, and in all other ways affecting their status and influence should be commensurate not merely with their numerical strength, but also with their political importance and the value of the contribution which they make to the defense of the empire. And we also hope that Your Excellency will in this connection be pleased to give due consideration to the position which they occupied in India a little more than 100 years ago, and of which the traditions have naturally not faded from their minds. Quotation finished. The portion in italics has a special significance. It was introduced in the address to suggest that in comprising the numerical strength of the Muslims with that of the Hindus, the population of the animists, tribals, and the untouchables should be excluded. The reason for this new classification of Hindus adopted by the Census Commissioner in 1910 lies in the demand of the Muslim community for separate representation on augmented scale. At any rate, this is how the Hindus understood this demand. Reference: this operation came soon after the address given by Muslim community to Lord Minto in 1909, in which they asked for a separate and adequate representation for the Muslim community. The Hindus smelt a rat in it, as the Census Commissioner observed, inverted comma, begins, incidentally, the inquiry generated a certain amount of heat because unfortunately it happened to be made at a time when the rival claims of Hindus and Mohammedans to representation in the legislative councils were being debated, and some of the former feared that it would lead to the exclusion of certain classes from the category of Hindus and would thus react unfavorably on their political importance. Inverted comma closed, reference over. Interesting as it is, the first question as to why the Census Commissioner made this departure in the system of classification is of less importance than the second question. What is important is to know the basis adopted by the Census Commissioner for separating the different classes of Hindus into 1. Those who were 100% Hindus, and 2. Those who were not. The basis adopted by the Census Commissioner for separation is to be found in the circular issued by the Census Commissioner, in which he laid down certain tests for the purpose of distinguishing these two classes. Refer to See Census of India, 1911, Pan 1, page 117. Reference over. Among those who were not 100% Hindus were included castes and tribes which, number 1, deny the supremacy of the Brahmins, 2, do not receive the mantra from a Brahmin or other recognized Hindu guru, 3, deny the authority of the Vedas, 4, do not worship the Hindu gods, 5, are not served by good Brahmins as family priests, 6, have no Brahmin priests at all, 7, are denied access to the interior of the Hindu temples, 8, cause pollution either by touch or by within a certain distance, 9, bury their dead, 10, eat beef and do no reverence to the cow. Out of these 10 tests, some divide the Hindus from the animists and the tribals. The rest divide the Hindus from the untouchables. Those that divide the untouchables from the Hindus are 2, 5, 6, 7, and 10. It is with them that we are chiefly concerned. The replies received by the Census Commissioner to questions embodied in tests 2, 5, and 6 reveal, number 1, that the untouchables do not receive the mantra from a Brahmin, 2, that the untouchables are not served by good Brahmin priests at all, and 3, that untouchables have their own priests reared from themselves. On these facts, the Census Commissioners of all provinces are unanimous. Reference to See Census of 1911 for Assam, page 40, for Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, page 282, for Central Provinces, page 73. Reference over. Of the 3 questions, the third is the most important. Unfortunately, the Census Commissioner did not realize this, for in making his inquiries, he failed to go to the root of the matter to find out why were the untouchables not receiving the mantra from the Brahmin. Why did Brahmins did not serve the untouchables as their family priests? Why do the untouchables prefer to have their own priests? It is the why of these facts which is more important than the existence of these facts. It is the why of these facts which must be investigated, for the clue to the origin of untouchability lies hidden behind it. Before entering upon this investigation, it must be pointed out that the inquiries by the Census Commissioner were in a sense one-sided. They showed that the Brahmins shunned the untouchables. They did not bring to light the fact that the untouchables also shunned the Brahmins. Nonetheless, it is a fact. People are so much accustomed to thinking that the Brahmin is the superior of the untouchables, and the untouchables accept himself as his inferior, that this statement that the untouchables look upon the Brahmins as an impure person is sure to come to them as a matter of great surprise. The fact has, however, been noted by many writers who have observed and examined the social customs of the untouchables. To remove any doubt on the point, attention is drawn to the extract from their writings. The fact was noticed by Abbe Dubois, who says, quotation begins, "Even to this day, a pariah is not allowed to pass a Brahmin street in a village, though nobody can prevent or prevents his approaching or passing by a Brahmin's house in towns. The pariahs on their part will under no circumstances allow a Brahmin to pass through their paracheris, that is collection of pariah huts, as they firmly believe it will lead to their ruin." Quotation finished. Reference to Hindu Manners and Customs, 3rd edition, page 61. Mr. Hemingsway, the editor of the Gazetteer of the Tanjore district, says, quotation begins, "These castes, Parayan and Pallan or Chakkilian castes of Tanjore district, strongly object to the entrance of a Brahmin into their quarters, believing that harm will result to them therefrom." Quotation finished. Reference taken from Gazetteer of Tanjore district, 1906, page 80. Speaking of the Holias of the Hassan district of Mysore, Captain J.S.F. Mackenzie says, quotation begins, "Every village has its Holigiri as the quarters inhabited by the Holiars. Formerly, agrestic serfs is called outside the village boundary hedge. This I thought was because they were considered as impure race, whose touch carries defilement with it." Quotation finished. Reference to Indian Antiquary, 1873, page 11.65. Such is the reason generally given by the Brahmins who refuse to receive anything directly from the hands of a Holiar, and yet the Brahmins consider great luck will wait upon them if they can manage to pass through the Holigiri without being molested. To this Holiars have a strong objection, and should a Brahmin attempt to enter their quarters, they turn out in a body and slipper him. In former times it is said to death. Members of the other castes may come as far as the door, but they must not enter the house, for that would bring the Holiar bad luck. If by chance a person happens to get in, the owners take care to tear the intruder's clothes, tie up some salt in one corner of it, and turn him out. This is supposed to neutralize all the good luck which might have accrued to the trespasser, and avert any evil which ought to have befallen the owner of the house. What is the explanation of this strange phenomena? The explanation must of course fit in with the situation as it stood at the start, that is, when the untouchables were not untouchables but were only broken men. We must ask why the Brahmins refused to officiate at the religious ceremonies of the broken men. Is it the case that the Brahmins refused to officiate, or is it that the broken men refused to invite them? Why did the Brahmin regard broken men as impure? Why did the broken men regard the Brahmins as impure? What is the basis for this antipathy? This antipathy can be explained on one hypothesis. It is that the broken men were Buddhists. As such, they did not revere the Brahmins, did not employ them as their priests, and regarded them as impure. The Brahmin, on the other hand, disliked the broken men because they were Buddhists and preached against them contempt and hatred, with the result that the broken men came to be regarded as untouchables. We have no direct evidence that the broken men were Buddhists. No evidence is, as a matter of fact, necessary when the majority of Hindus were Buddhists. We may take it that they were, that there existed hatred and abhorrence against the Buddhists in the mind of the Hindus, and that this feeling was created by the Brahmins is not without support. Nilkant, in his Praishchit Mayukha, quotes a verse from Manu, reference taken from the book edited by Gharpure, page number 95. It says, quotation begins, "If a person touches a Buddhist or a flower of Pachupat, Lokayala, Nastika and Mahapataki, he shall purify himself by a bath." Quotation finished. The same doctrine is preached by Aprarka in his Smriti, reference to Smriti Samuchay, volume 1, page 118. Vriddhaharit goes further and declares entry into the Buddhist temple as sin requiring a purificatory bath for removing the impurity. How widespread had become this spirit of hatred and contempt against the followers of Buddha can be observed from the scenes depicted in Sanskrit dramas. The most striking illustration of this attitude towards the Buddhists is to be found in the Mrichkatika. In Act 7 of the drama, the hero Charudatta and his friend Maitreya are shown waiting for Vasantasena in the park outside the city. She fails to turn up and Charudatta decides to leave the park. As they are leaving, they see the Buddhist monk by name Samvahaka. On seeing him, Charudatta says, inverted comma begins, "Friend Maitreya, I am anxious to meet Vasantasena. Come, let us go." Within brackets, after walking a little, "Ah, here is an inauspicious sight, a Buddhist monk coming towards us." Within brackets, after a little reflection, "Well, let him come this way. We shall follow this other path." Within brackets, exits. Inverted comma closed. In Act 8, the monk is in the park of Sakara, the king's brother-in-law, washing his clothes in a pool. Sakara, accompanied by Vita, turns up and threatens to kill the monk. The conversation between them is revealing. Inverted comma begins, Sakara, "Stay, you wicked monk." Monk, "Ah, here is the king's brother-in-law. Because some monk has offended him, he now beats up any monk he happens to meet." Sakara, "Stay, I will now break your head as one breaks a radish in a tavern." Beats him. Vita, "Friend, it is not proper to beat a monk who has put on the saffron robes, being disgusted with the world." Monk welcomes, "Be pleased, lay brother." Sakara, "Friend, see, he is abusing me." Vita, "What does he say?" Sakara, "He calls me lay brother, that is Upasaka. Am I a barber?" Vita, "Oh, he is really praising you as a devotee of the Buddha." Sakara, "Why has he come here?" Monk, "To wash these clothes." Sakara, "Ah, you wicked monk, even I myself do not bathe in this pool. I shall kill you with one stroke." Inverted comma closed. After a lot of beating, the monk is allowed to go. Here is a Buddhist monk in the midst of the Hindu crowd. He is shunned and avoided. The feeling of disgust against him is so great that the people even shun the road the monk is traveling. The feeling of repulsion is so intense that the entry of the Buddhist was enough to cause the exit of the Hindus. The Buddhist monk is on a par with the Brahmin. A Brahmin is immune from death penalty. He is even free from corporal punishment, but the Buddhist monk is beaten and assaulted without remorse, without compunction, as though there was nothing wrong in it. If we accept that the broken men were the followers of Buddhism and did not care to return to Brahmanism when it became triumphant over Buddhism as easily as others did, we have an explanation for both the questions. It explains why the untouchables regard the Brahmins as inauspicious, do not employ them as their priest, and do not even allow them to enter into their quarters. It also explains why the broken men came to be regarded as untouchables. Broken men hated the Brahmins because the Brahmins were the enemies of Buddhism, and the Brahmins imposed untouchability upon the broken men because they would not leave Buddhism. On this reasoning, it is possible to conclude that one of the roots of untouchability lies in the hatred and contempt which the Brahmins created against those who were Buddhist. Can the hatred between Buddhism and Brahmanism be taken to be the sole cause why broken men became untouchables? Obviously, it cannot be. The hatred and contempt preached by the Brahmins was directed against Buddhists in general and not against the broken men in particular. Since untouchability stuck to broken men only, it is obvious that there was some additional circumstance which has played its part in fastening untouchability upon the broken men. What that circumstance could have been, we must next direct our effort in the direction of ascertaining it. Chapter 10. Beef eating as the root of untouchability. We now take up test number 10, referred to in the circular issued by the Census Commissioner, and to which reference has already been made in the previous chapter. The test refers to beef eating. The census returns show that the meat of the dead cow forms the chief item of food consumed by communities which are generally classified as untouchable communities. No Hindu community, however low, will touch cow's flesh. On the other hand, there is no community which is really an untouchable community which has not something to do with the dead cow. Some eat her flesh, some remove the skin, some manufacture articles out of her skin and bones. From the survey of the Census Commissioner, it is well established that untouchables eat beef. The question, however, is, has beef eating any relation to the origin of untouchability? Or is it merely an incident in the economic life of the untouchables? Can we say that the broken men came to be treated as untouchables because they ate beef? There need be no hesitation in returning an affirmative answer to this question. No other answer is consistent with facts as we know them. In the first place, we have the fact that the untouchables, or the main communities which compose them, eat the dead cow, and those who eat the dead cow are tainted with untouchability and no others. The correlation between untouchability and the use of the dead cow is so great and so close that the thesis that it is the root of untouchability seems to be incontrovertible. In the second place, if there is anything that separates the untouchables from the Hindus, it is beef eating. Even a superficial view of the food taboos of the Hindus will show that there are two taboos regarding food which serve as dividing lines. There is one taboo against meat eating. It divides Hindus into vegetarians and flesh eaters. There is another taboo which is against beef eating. It divides Hindus into those who eat cow's flesh and those who do not. From the point of view of untouchability, the first dividing line is of no importance, but the second is, for it completely marks off the touchables from the untouchables. The touchables, whether they are vegetarians or flesh eaters, are united in their objection to eat cow's flesh. As against them stand the untouchables who eat cow's flesh without compunction and as a matter of course and habit. Reference to the untouchables have felt the force of the accusation leveled against them by the Hindus for eating beef. Instead of giving up the habit, the untouchables have invented a philosophy which justifies eating the beef of the dead cow. The gist of the philosophy is that eating the flesh of the dead cow is a better way of showing respect to the cow than throwing her carcass to the wind. Reference over. In this context, it is not far-fetched to suggest that those who have a nausea against beef eating should treat those who eat beef as untouchables. There is really no necessity to enter upon any speculation as to whether beef eating was or was not the principal reason for the rise of untouchability. This new theory receives support from the Hindu Shastras. The Ved-Vyas-Smriti contains these verses which specify the communities which are included in the category of Antyajas and the reason why they were so included. Reference to quoted in Kane's History of Dharmashastra, Volume 2, Part 1, page 71. Inverted comma begins. The Charmakars, that is the cobbler, the Bhatta, that is the soldier, the Bhilla, the Rajaka, that is the washerman, the Pushkara, the Nata, that is the actor, the Vrita, the Meda, the Chandal, the Dasa, the Swapaka, and the Kolika. These were known as Antyajas as well as others who eat cow's flesh. Inverted comma closed. Generally speaking, the Smritikars never care to explain the why and the how of their dogmas. But this case is exception. For in this case, Ved-Vyas does explain the cause of untouchability. The clause, as well as others who eat cow's flesh, is very important. It shows that the Smritikars knew that the origin of untouchability is to be found in the eating of beef. The dictum of Ved-Vyas must close the argument. It comes, so to say, straight from the horse's mouth, and what is important is that it is also rational, for it accords with facts as we know them. The new approach in the search for the origin of untouchability has brought to the surface two sources of the origin of untouchability. One is the general atmosphere of scorn and contempt spread by the Brahmins against those who were Buddhists, and the second is the habit of beef eating kept on by the broken men. As has been said, the first circumstance could not be sufficient to account for stigma of untouchability attaching itself to the broken men, for the scorn and contempt for Buddhists spread by the Brahmins was too general and affected all Buddhists and not merely the broken men. The reason why broken men only became untouchables was because, in addition to being Buddhists, they retained their habit of beef eating, which gave additional ground for offense to the Brahmins to carry their newfound love and reference to the cow to its logical conclusion. We may therefore conclude that the broken men were exposed to scorn and contempt on the ground that they were Buddhists. The main cause of their untouchability was beef eating. The theory of beef eating as the cause of untouchability also gives rise to many questions. Critics are sure to ask, what is the cause of the nausea which the Hindus have against beef eating? Were the Hindus always opposed to beef eating? If not, why did they develop such a nausea against it? Were the untouchables given to beef eating from the very start? Why did they not give up beef eating when it was abandoned by the Hindus? Were the untouchables always untouchables? If there was a time when the untouchables were not untouchables, even though they ate beef, why should beef eating give rise to untouchability at a later stage? If the Hindus were eating beef, when did they give it up? If untouchability is a reflex of the nausea of the Hindus against beef eating, how long after the Hindus had given up beef eating did untouchability come into being? These questions must be answered. Without an answer to these questions, the theory will remain under cloud. It will be considered as plausible but may not be accepted as conclusive. Having put forth the theory, I am bound to answer these questions. I propose to take up these heads. 1. Did the Hindus never eat beef? 2. What led the Hindus to give up beef eating? 3. What led the Brahmins to become vegetarians? 4. Why did beef eating give rise to untouchability? And 5. When was untouchability born?